welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. I want you to just close your eyes for a second, unless you're driving. Please don't do that. And picture a witch.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see? I'm guessing it's a pointy hat,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a broomstick, a bubbling cauldron.
A black hat, probably.
A black cat, for sure. We tend to think of witchcraft as this single monolithic thing. You have the aesthetic, the costume, and that's it. But what if I told you that geography actually changes the magic itself?
It's a really fascinating premise, isn't it? We often treat spiritual practices as if they exist in a vacuum or as if they're just ideas floating out there.
Yeah.
But the reality is they are deeply rooted in the soil where they grow. Today, we're looking at a really compelling piece called The Craft Across the Atlantic. And it makes the argument that American and British traditions, while they share DNA, they're essentially distinct species, shaped by history and landscape.
Exactly. And our mission today is to unpack not just how they differ, because, spoiler alert, they look very different, but why. Why the environment and history forced them to evolve in such opposite directions.
It's nature versus nurture, but for magic.
Totally.
And I think it's important to frame this right at the start. This is not a battle of which is better or which is more authentic.
No, not at all.
It's a case study in how culture shapes spirituality. The source material emphasizes that while both share roots in, European folk magic, pre-Christian traditions, and herbalism, the specific pressures cause them to bloom differently.
I love the analogy the source uses. It's the difference between a wildflower in an ancient English hedgerow and a hybrid plant in a busy American city garden.
That's the one. It really sets the stage perfectly.
So let's start with that wildflower. Let's talk about the older sibling, so to speak, British witchcraft. When I was reading through the material, the word that just kept coming up for me was continuity.
That is the key word, continuity.
Mm-hmm.
You have to remember, Britain has a landscape with long-established pagan traditions that are, they're physically visible.
Right.
We're talking about deep ties to specific landscapes, ancient landmarks, stone circles.
Things that have been there for thousands of years.
Exactly. So British witchcraft developed within a land that had these sort of uninterrupted folk traditions. You have these oral practices passed down through generations.
So it's not necessarily something you go to a bookstore to learn. It's something
Yeah.
your grandmother might have whispered to you while you were gardening.
Precisely. And this brings us to the figure of the cunning folk. In British history, you had these village healers, the cunning folk, who were integral to the community.
Right, they weren't these dark, mysterious figures living in a castle plotting revenge.
No, not at all. They were practical service providers.
That was a surprising detail for me, the sheer practicality of it.
Yeah.
The source mentions a lot of this quote-unquote magic was focused on protection, healing, weather, crops, household concerns.
It sounds almost domestic, doesn't it?
Yeah, like you have a headache or your cow isn't producing milk, so you go see the local wise woman.
It was incredibly utilitarian. It was woven into the fabric of daily agrarian life rather than being separated as some formal high ritual. And because of that, the aesthetic is very different.
How so?
Well, the source describes British craft as using minimal tools. It's often about found objects.
So less buying a polished crystal wand on Etsy and more picking up a cool stone with a hole in it that you found in the river.
Exactly, hagstones. But yes, it relies heavily on the spoken word, on folk charms, and pure intention. You don't need an elaborate setup if the power is coming from the land you're standing on and the words you've inherited.
Okay, but there's another side to this continuity, and that's the secrecy.
Oh, yes. The keep it quiet vibe.
Yeah.
The source highlights that British traditions really value secrecy and subtlety, and you have to connect this to the history of persecution. The witch trials acts were very real.
So even though these cunning folk were helpful, there was always a danger in standing out too much.
Always. So the tradition became private. It was passed through lineage or very close teaching. It avoids the spotlight. It's not about broadcasting your identity. It's about doing the work quietly.
Which is a huge contrast to where we're going next.
Yeah.
Let's hop across the pond to America. If British witchcraft is defined by continuity and deep roots,
Then American witchcraft is defined by fragmentation.
and reinvention.
Yes. And this is where the history lesson gets really intense and, frankly, a bit tragic. Think about the forces that shaped America.
It's a pressure cooker?
It is. You have immigration from Europe, bringing pockets of folklore but leaving the actual land behind.
Yeah.
You have the forced displacement of indigenous peoples. You have the survival traditions born from the horrors of enslavement. And then you have this overlay of intense religious oppression.
Right. You just don't have that single uninterrupted line of, my grandmother's grandmother lived in this village for 500 years. Everyone is moving. Everyone is mixing.
The chain of memory is broken. So, because those traditions were broken or lost, American witches had to become reconstructionists. They had to build something new. The source talks a lot about syncretism, which is a term we should probably unpack.
Yeah, let's do that. What exactly is syncretism in this context?
Syncretism is basically when you take two or more different belief systems or practices and you blend them together to create something new.
Okay.
So maybe you take a folk remedy from Ireland, mix it with a divination technique from West Africa, and wrap it in a structure that fits, say, the American South. You use what works.
So you don't have the luxury of a pure, unbroken tradition.
Exactly. It's the melting pot effect. You take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you build a spiritual survival kit. And that leads to the defining trait of American craft, eclecticism.
Right. The source points out that American witchcraft prioritizes personal choice, innovation, and, what was the phrase? Spiritual self-identification.
That's it. It's less about sticking rigidly to a single lineage because often that lineage just isn't available. You have to be a magpie, collecting shiny bits of truth where you find them.
Which explains so much. When you walk into a metaphysical shop in the U.S., you see books on everything from Celtic knots to Eastern meditation to Latin American folk magic, all on the same shelf.
It's if it works, use it. But there's a pragmatism there that's also about accessibility.
Yeah.
And that's the key difference from the British secrecy we just discussed.
Openness.
Yes, American witchcraft embraces openness. Books, blogs, podcasts, public education, it is highly visible.
It's almost like the democratization of magic. Like, here's the manual, go do it yourself.
In a way, yes. It reflects that American cultural value of individualism. There's a sense that knowledge shouldn't be gated by gatekeepers. It should be available to anyone who seeks it.
Okay, so let's get to the nitty-gritty. The source has this great section comparing the tools. We touched on this, but let's dig in. We said British is minimalist, found objects. What about the American side?
The source describes American witchcraft as tool-rich.
Tool-rich. I feel seen. I love a good gadget. But why is that? Is it just consumerism?
It's easy to dismiss it as that, but the analysis goes a lot deeper. It suggests that if you don't have that deep ancestral connection to the land right beneath your feet.
If the land feels new or foreign.
Right. You build a connection through symbols. So you see a lot of emphasis on altar work, on ritual structure, on personal symbolism. You build a sacred space because the space around you might not feel sacred by default.
That is a really profound point. It's about constructing a sense of place. If the hill outside your window doesn't have a name you know, you put a statue on your table to anchor yourself.
Exactly. It serves as a psychological anchor.
Yeah.
And speaking of that hill, the source had a really interesting take on how these two groups view the land itself.
This was my favorite part. In the British worldview, because of that continuity, you're dealing with specific local spirits. You know the lore of that hill, that river.
The spirits have names. We call it the genius loci, the spirit of the place. In Britain, the practice is often about negotiating with the specific entities that live right there.
So it's Old Man Willow down by the creek.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But in America, because of displacement and, the lack of those ancestral ties to a specific plot of land, the source notes that American craft often works with more generalized elemental or archetypal energies.
So instead of the spirit of Sherwood Forest, it's just the element of earth.
Yes. It becomes about personal grounding rather than inherited land ties. You connect to the concept of earth or the archetype of the goddess rather than the specific local spirit your ancestors knew.
It makes the magic portable.
That's a perfect way to put it.
If you move from Ohio to California, which Americans do all the time, the element of earth is still there, but the local river spirit isn't.
Exactly. It allows for mobility. And this bleeds into how knowledge is transferred too. In the British model, there's a heavy emphasis on elders, lineage, apprenticeship.
Quite authority.
That's the phrase. You learn from someone who knows more than you versus the American model.
Which emphasizes personal sovereignty.
Right. Self-teaching, shared knowledge. I read 3 books, I practiced in my backyard, and now I have my own valid practice. It's very empowering for the individual.
Okay, we have to talk about the elephant, or maybe the cat in the room. Wicca. I think a lot of people use witchcraft and Wicca interchangeably, but they are different. And the history here is a perfect example of this Atlantic split.
It really is. I mean, the source notes that Wicca actually originated in Britain in the mid-20th century, Gerald Gardner.
Right.
But in Britain, it stayed very close to those roots we discussed. It remained initiatory, coven-based, and it emphasized tradition and secrecy.
So if you wanted to be a Wiccan in Britain in the 1950s or 60s, you had to find a coven and be initiated.
Yeah.
You couldn't just, buy a starter kit.
Correct, it was a mystery religion, but then it crosses the ocean to America. And what happens?
It explodes, but it changes.
It changes completely. American Wicca became accessible and solitary. The source specifically notes that books and public teaching expanded rapidly in the U.S.
Scott Cunningham is the big name there. He wrote these huge bestsellers about Wicca for the solitary practitioner.
Exactly. And that influenced the broader culture to be more eclectic. It took this mystery tradition and turned it into a personal spirituality. It's a perfect example of how the American environment takes a seed and grows something totally different.
Okay, so we have these two very different vibes. One is quiet, rooted, minimalist. The other is loud, eclectic, and tool-heavy. But the force lists some common misconceptions we really need to clear up.
It's so easy to fall into stereotypes here.
It is.
The first big one is that British craft is not all Wicca. The traditional craft in Britain is often non-Wiccan, much older and distinct. It's often much grittier.
And on the flip side, the source says we shouldn't view American craft as less valid just because it's eclectic. I think there's sometimes a snobbery there, right? Like, oh, you just made that up.
There is a tension there, for sure. But the source argues that eclectic doesn't mean careless, and tradition doesn't mean rigid. Just because someone in America is blending traditions doesn't mean they aren't doing serious, deep work.
Reconstruction is hard work. You're basically being an archaeologist of the soul.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And frankly, the lines are blurring now anyway. We live in the internet age.
Yeah, TikTok witches are everywhere, whether they're in London or Los Angeles.
And the source points this out. Modern witchcraft is global. Both sides share information across borders. British witches are reading American books. American witches are learning about British folklore online.
And despite all the differences in method, wand or stick, local spirit or archetype, the source says they share core values today.
Things like ethics, consent, and adapting to modern needs. Those are universal now. Whether you're in a coven in the New Forest or practicing alone in a New York apartment, you're grappling with similar questions.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I think there's a broader lesson here about how we relate to our history and our environment.
I agree. It forces you to ask what resonates with you personally. Do you value structure, lineage, and doing things the way they've always been done?
Or do you value flexibility, innovation, and building something that fits your specific identity?
It's the difference between restoring an old house and building a custom home.
Yeah, both give you shelter, both can be beautiful, but the process is totally different.
And neither is right or wrong. The source puts it beautifully. They're not opposites. They are reflections of the cultures that shape them. One emphasizes continuity and land, the other adaptation and identity.
I love that. The magic isn't in the specific tool or spell, but in the interaction between the person and their world.
And that leads to a really provocative thought to leave you with. The source suggests that witchcraft is not static. It lives where people practice it. The craft changes, but the magic remains. Which makes me wonder, if we colonize Mars one day, what will Martian witchcraft look like?
Oh, wow. Talk about being disconnected from the land. You'd have to invent entirely new gods for the red planet.
Exactly. You have no seasons as we know them. You have no tides. You have 2 small moons instead of 1 big one. They'd probably look back at Earth traditions the way Americans look back at Europe.
As this distant ancestral thing that needs to be completely adapted for a new, harsh environment.
They'd have to create a red planet magics from scratch.
That is a deep thought to end on. If you want to dive deeper into all of this, check the show notes. We've linked the source article, The Craft Across the Atlantic. It's well worth a read.
Absolutely. It really challenges your assumptions about what tradition even means.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Whether you're rooted in the soil or building your own castle in the clouds, keep exploring.